Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. Some evenings don't feel heavy because of what happened during the day. They feel heavy because of how you spoke to yourself while it was happening. Not out loud, just quietly in ways no one else could hear. Jasmine had gotten used to that voice. She was 34, worked as a real estate agent, and spent most of her days smiling, reassuring, adjusting her tone depending on who stood in front of her. Confidence was part of the job. Calm, too. People wanted to feel safe when they talked about homes, money, futures. Jasmine knew how to give them that feeling. What she rarely gave herself was the same kindness. That night she came home later than planned. Not late enough to be a problem, just late enough to feel the day lingering in her body. She slipped off her shoes, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, and went straight to the bathroom without turning on the overhead lights. The small lamp above the mirror was enough. She turned on the faucet and washed her hands slowly, watching the water move over her skin. Clear, steady, predictable. The fan hummed softly above her, filling the room with a low, even sound. Jasmine looked up at the mirror without really meaning to. Her reflection stared back familiar and slightly tired. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing remarkable either. Just a face at the end of a long day. And then the voice showed up. You should have handled that call better. You sounded unsure. You probably came off as unprepared. The thoughts arrived the way they always did, quick, automatic, dressed up as helpful feedback. Jasmine didn't flinch. She had heard them so many times they felt like part of the background. She reached for a towel and dried her hands, her eyes still on the mirror. For a moment, she noticed something small. The tighter her thoughts became, the harder her face looked. Jaw set, brow slightly furrowed, shoulders rising without permission. She exhaled without planning to. The face in the mirror softened just a little. Jasmine leaned closer and rested her hands on the edge of the sink. The glass reflected her exactly as she was. Not worse, not better, just accurate. She thought about how often she treated herself like a project that needed constant improvement. How every interaction became something to review, every silence something to interpret. The world in her mind felt sharp because her inner lens was sharp. The mirror didn't argue. It didn't reassure her either. It simply showed what was placed in front of it. Water continued to run in the sink. Jasmine turned it off and listened to the last drops fade away. The quiet felt wider now, like the room had exhaled with her. She remembered something she once heard, though she couldn't recall where. A lake reflects whatever stands before it. It doesn't decide what's worthy of being seen. That idea stayed with her as she studied her own reflection. Maybe the world hadn't been harsh today. Maybe it had simply been reflecting the way she was looking at herself. That thought didn't accuse her. It didn't blame her. It just hovered, offering space. Jasmine straightened and gently wiped a small smudge from the mirror with her sleeve. The glass cleared only slightly, but enough to notice the difference. The reflection didn't change much, but the effort felt kind. She turned off the bathroom light and walked into the bedroom, leaving the mirror behind. The apartment was quiet. Streetlights cast soft lines across the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed and let her shoulders drop forward, then back. For the first time that evening, she didn't replay the day. She didn't rewrite conversations. She didn't correct herself. She simply sat. If the world felt harsh sometimes, Jasmine realized it might not be because it was judging her. It might be because she was standing in front of it with clenched hands and a tight heart. And just like the mirror, the world could only reflect what it was given. She lay down slowly, the mattress meeting her weight without resistance. Her breathing deepened on its own. Somewhere inside, the voice grew quieter, not because it was silenced, but because it wasn't being fed. The lake doesn't need to change the sky. It only needs stillness to reflect it clearly. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting that thought settle without turning it into a rule or a promise. Just a gentle understanding, allowed to be unfinished. Jasmine lay still for a while, long enough for the room to lose its edges. The streetlights outside didn't move, but their glow softened as her eyes adjusted. Somewhere below, a car passed and then faded, leaving the night intact again. Nothing called for her attention. Nothing needed a response. Her body began to settle in small, quiet ways. Her jaw loosened first, then her shoulders. The tight place between her ribs softened, as if it had finally been given permission to stop holding itself together. She thought again about the mirror, about how easily she had believed the reflection was the problem. For so long she had assumed that if the image felt harsh, then something about her must be harsh too. But mirrors don't judge. They don't criticize. They don't exaggerate. They only show what's placed in front of them exactly as it is. The same was true, she realized, for so many moments in her life. Conversations that felt cold, silences that felt heavy, rejections that felt personal. What if they weren't proof of something wrong with her, but reflections of how tightly she was holding herself while standing there? The thought didn't land as a revelation. It felt more like a quiet reframing, the kind that doesn't ask you to change immediately, just to notice. Jasmine turned onto her side and pulled the blanket up a little higher. The fabric brushed against her cheek, grounding familiar. Her breathing slowed further, deep and uncounted. Thoughts still came, but they moved like ripples now instead of waves. A showing that didn't turn into an argument. A message she hadn't answered yet. A feeling of mild regret that didn't demand punishment. She noticed how different it felt to meet those thoughts without sharpening them, without turning them into evidence, without adding a second layer of judgment on top. In the bathroom earlier, when she had softened her face, the reflection had softened too. Not because the mirror changed, but because she did. That small act of gentleness had altered the entire scene. Maybe self-worth wasn't something you built or earned. Maybe it was something that appeared naturally when you stopped attacking your own reflection. Jasmine didn't promise herself she would be kinder from now on. She knew better than to make vows at night, but she allowed the possibility that tomorrow didn't need to begin with criticism. That the day could be met with open hands instead of clenched ones. Her breath moved slowly in and out, steady as water settling after being stirred. The image of a lake came to her mind, calm and wide. When the surface is agitated, everything looks distorted. When it rests, the sky shows itself without effort. She didn't need to fix the lake. She only needed to stop throwing stones into it. The thought drifted through her and dissolved before it could turn into advice. Jasmine stayed with the feeling instead. The quiet relief of not having to manage herself for a moment. The safety of not being evaluated. Outside, the city continued to exist without her supervision. Lights stayed on, lights turned off, people slept, people woke. The world didn't require her commentary to keep moving. Jasmine felt herself getting heavier in the good way. The kind of heaviness that comes before sleep when the body trusts the surface beneath it. Her eyelids grew warm. The space behind her eyes darkened. If the world reflected how she treated herself, then this moment mattered. Not as a lesson, not as a breakthrough, but as practice. A brief experience of being met with softness instead of scrutiny. She let her thoughts blur at the edges, let the day slide out of focus. There would be time later to look again if needed. Tonight wasn't for that. The lake doesn't hold on to images. It reflects and then it rests. Jasmine rested too. Jason turned off the engine and stayed in the car. The parking lot was almost empty. A few lights buzzed overhead, throwing pale circles onto the asphalt. Somewhere nearby, a tree moved in the wind, its leaves brushing against each other in a slow, uneven rhythm. He should have gone inside. His apartment was only a short walk away. But he stayed where he was, hands resting on the steering wheel, shoulders slightly hunched forward as if he were still bracing for something. Jason was 23, a community college student still figuring out what he was supposed to become. Lately, it felt like everyone else had already decided. Friends posting graduation photos, new jobs, new cities, new lives that looked clean and confident from the outside. He hadn't failed. Not exactly. But he hadn't arrived anywhere either. Jason glanced at his phone on the passenger seat face down. He already knew what was there. Notifications he didn't want to open. Photos he didn't want to compare himself to. Timelines that made his own life feel stalled. He looked away and focused instead on the tree near the edge of the lot. It was old, thick trunk, wide branches reaching out in every direction. The kind of tree that didn't look like it had ever been in a hurry. Its roots must have been deep by now, spreading out beneath the concrete in ways no one could see. Jason watched it sway slightly in the breeze and felt something tighten in his chest. Earlier that day, he'd been in a small garden section of a hardware store, killing time before class. He hadn't meant to stop there. He just wandered in, drawn by the quiet. On a low shelf near the back, he'd noticed a row of bonsai trees, each one carefully shaped, trimmed, wired into a precise form. They were beautiful, controlled, finished. He remembered thinking how neat they looked, how intentional, how impressive it must be to grow something so perfectly contained. Now sitting in his car, he thought about the difference between those bonsai trees and the old one in front of him. Both alive, both real, but grown under very different conditions. Jason rested his forehead lightly against the steering wheel. The car was still warm from the drive. The faint smell of plastic and dust filled the space. He'd spent the last year feeling like a bonsai in the wrong pot, trimmed too often, compared too closely, constantly adjusted to fit a shape he wasn't even sure he wanted. Every time he thought about taking a different path, a quieter voice in his head would pull him back. "You're falling behind. You should be further along by now." That voice sounded practical, reasonable. It rarely yelled. It just kept pointing out how much taller other people seemed. Jason straightened up and rolled his shoulders, trying to release some of the tension that had been building there all evening. His breath came shallow at first, then slowly deepened as he sat there longer. The old tree outside didn't care how tall it looked compared to anything else. It wasn't measured against a timeline. It didn't apologize for growing slowly or unevenly. It simply took up the space it had been given year after year. Jason realized how often he'd assumed there was a single right shape for a life. Graduate by this age, earn this much, know this clearly who you are. Anything outside that shape felt like a mistake. But what if some lives weren't meant to be trimmed small and tidy? What if some needed time, space, messy seasons where nothing looked impressive from the outside? He opened the car door and stepped out. The air felt cooler, immediately brushing against his face and arms. He walked a few steps toward the tree, stopping at the edge of the parking lot. Up close, the bark was rough, uneven. Scars from years of weather insects, repairs the tree had done on its own. Jason reached out and rested his palm against the trunk. It felt solid, grounded, alive. The tree hadn't grown like this by accident. It had grown like this because it had been allowed to. Jason closed his eyes for a moment and let himself breathe. Not deeply on purpose, just enough to feel the air move in and out of his chest without resistance. Maybe he wasn't late. Maybe he wasn't behind. Maybe he was just not meant to grow in a shallow container. The thought didn't solve anything. It didn't give him a plan. But it loosened something inside him, the way loosening a tight knot doesn't fix the rope but makes it usable again. Jason stepped back, gave the tree one last look, and headed toward his apartment. The night felt quieter now, less judgmental. Not because his life had changed, but because the way he was measuring it had softened. Some things aren't small because they're weak. Some things are small because someone keeps cutting them back, and some things, given enough room, grow exactly as they're meant to. Jason didn't turn on the lights when he entered the apartment. The faint glow from the parking lot slipped in through the window, enough to see the outlines of furniture, enough to move without effort. He set his keys down on the counter and left his shoes by the door, not lining them up the way he usually did. Tonight didn't feel like a night for adjustments. He sat on the edge of the couch and let his back curve forward naturally, elbows resting on his thighs. His phone stayed in his pocket. For once, he didn't feel pulled toward it. The comparisons it held felt distant now, like something that belonged to another room. The image of the old tree stayed with him, not as a lesson, not as an idea to apply, but as a feeling in his body. The weight of the trunk, the steadiness, the sense of time moving slowly, without apology. Jason noticed how often his life had felt like it was being shaped from the outside. Grades, expectations, advice offered with good intentions, all of it trimming, wiring, redirecting. None of it meant to harm him, and yet something in him had been quietly resisting for a long time. He leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. A small crack ran across it, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. He had lived here for months before ever seeing it. Now it seemed almost comforting proof that things didn't need to be flawless to hold. The old tree outside hadn't asked to be admired. It hadn't worried about being impressive. It had grown because it was alive, because the ground beneath it was deep enough, because no one had tried to make it smaller to fit a shelf. Jason felt his breathing slow as that thought settled. Not intentionally, not as a technique, just a natural response to not being measured for a moment. He thought about the bonsai trees again, how much care they required, how carefully they were pruned, shaped, constrained. They weren't wrong. They were beautiful in their own way. But they needed constant attention to remain that way. Maybe some lives thrived on structure and careful shaping, and maybe others needed seasons of uneven growth stretches where nothing looked tidy or finished. Maybe comparing one to the other had never made sense in the first place. Jason shifted his weight and felt the couch cushion rise and fall beneath him. The room was quiet enough that he could hear his own breath, steady and unforced. The tension he'd been carrying in his chest earlier had softened like a muscle finally allowed to rest. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel resolved. What he felt was simpler than that. He felt allowed. Allowed to grow slowly. Allowed to change direction. Allowed not to know yet. The pressure to arrive somewhere specific eased its grip. Not gone, just quieter, less convincing. It no longer sounded like truth, more like a habit losing momentum. Jason stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the parking lot. The tree was still there, barely visible now, its shape blending into the dark. He didn't need to see it clearly to know it was standing. Some growth happens where no one is watching. Some strength comes from being left alone. He turned away from the window and moved toward the bedroom. The floor was cool under his feet. The bed welcomed him without resistance, sheets folding easily around his weight. He lay on his side and let his arms rest where they fell. There was nothing he needed to plan tonight, nothing he needed to compare. Tomorrow could handle itself. As his eyes grew heavy, Jason noticed one last thing. The feeling of being behind had been replaced by something quieter. A sense of being exactly where he was without judgment attached. Not small, not late, just growing in his own way. The old tree didn't rush the night, and neither did he. The room settled. The thoughts thinned. The measuring stopped. And in the dark, with no one watching, something inside him continued to grow slowly, naturally, without needing to prove itself at all. The garage smelled like oil, and old metal, the kind of smell that never really leaves, no matter how many times you clean. Derek liked that about it. It felt honest. Nothing pretending to be new. He stood near the workbench with his sleeves rolled up, hands dark with grease. The overhead light casting a dull yellow circle onto the concrete floor. The shop was closed for the night. No engines running, no radios playing, just the quiet hum of the light and the faint ticking sound of cooling metal. Derek was 52, a mechanic most of his life. The kind who could listen to an engine for 10 seconds and know where the problem lived. People trusted him with their cars, with their safety. They didn't know how often he questioned himself when the garage door rolled down at the end of the day. He picked up a rag and wiped his hands slowly, not trying to get them perfectly clean. Some stains stayed no matter what you did. He'd learned not to fight that. Earlier that afternoon, a customer had made an offhand comment. Nothing cruel, just careless. Something about getting older, about how long guys like you keep doing this kind of work. Derek had laughed it off. He always did. But the words had followed him into the evening, settling somewhere behind his ribs. He leaned his hip against the bench and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The garage felt different at night, less demanding, more forgiving. During the day, everything was about fixing, adjusting, restoring things to how they were supposed to be. At night, nothing asked to be repaired. Derek's eyes drifted to a block of stone sitting in the corner, half covered with a tarp. It had been there for months, a leftover from a project he never finished. He hadn't planned on keeping it. It just stayed. He walked over and pulled the tarp back. The stone was rough, uneven edges chipped. To anyone else, it probably looked like a mistake. A failed start. Something abandoned halfway through. Derek ran his hand over the surface. Cool, solid, unapologetic. Years ago, when his kids were still young, he'd taken them to a museum on a rare day off. He remembered standing in front of a sculpture, massive and calm, carved from a single block of stone. One of his kids had asked how the artist knew what it would look like before starting. The guide had smiled and said the sculpture was already there. The artist just removed what didn't belong. That line had stayed with Derek longer than he expected. At the time, he'd thought it sounded poetic. Now, standing alone in his garage, it felt uncomfortably personal. Derek thought about his own life, the things that had chipped away at him over the years, long hours, missed moments, mistakes he replayed more often than he admitted, words he wished he'd said differently, paths he hadn't taken because responsibility had come first. Sometimes it felt like life had taken a hammer to him without asking, like he'd been worn down instead of shaped. He rested his forehead briefly against the cool stone and closed his eyes. Not in defeat, just in acknowledgement. What if the years hadn't been punishing him? What if they had been revealing him? The thought didn't land easily. It pushed against something tight in his chest. Derek wasn't used to being gentle with himself. He respected effort, endurance, getting through. But gentleness had always felt like something you earned later, if at all. He stepped back and looked at the stone again, this time with different eyes. It wasn't unfinished. It was becoming. The marks on its surface told a story of pressure resistance time. None of that made it worthless. None of it meant it had failed. Derek wiped his hands again and hung the rag on a hook by the door. He turned off the overhead light, leaving only a small lamp on near the bench. The garage slipped into shadow edges, softening expectations, fading with the brightness. He sat down on an old stool and let his shoulders drop forward. The day drained out of him slowly, like oil settling after an engine shuts down. His breathing deepened without instruction. So much of his regret came from believing he should look different by now, more polished, more certain, less marked by wear. But stone doesn't apologize for its marks. It carries them as proof of process. Derek stayed there, surrounded by quiet, letting that idea exist without trying to turn it into wisdom. Just a possibility. A softer way to see the same life. The stone waited patiently in the corner, unchanged, unbothered by the hour. And for the first time in a long while, Derek didn't feel the need to fix what he was seeing. Derek stayed on the stool longer than he expected. The small lamp cast a low amber light across the garage, turning sharp edges into softer shapes. The stone in the corner no longer looked heavy. It simply looked present, as if it had always belonged there. He noticed how different the space felt when nothing needed to be repaired. During the day, every sound in the garage meant something was wrong. At night, the quiet meant things were allowed to rest exactly as they were. Derek leaned back slightly and let his hands rest on his thighs. The grease under his nails no longer bothered him. It felt like evidence, not dirt. Proof of a life spent working, showing up, doing what needed to be done, even when it wasn't glamorous. For years, he had carried the belief that wear meant decline. That every mark on his body, every line on his face, every regret in his memory was a sign that something had gone off course. But the stone didn't see it that way. It had been shaped by pressure, not ruined by it. The thought settled in him slowly, without resistance. He didn't need to rewrite his past. He didn't need to forgive himself all at once. He only needed to stop treating his own history like a failure. Derek stood up and walked back to the stone, placing both hands on its surface again. He didn't imagine a finished form inside it. He didn't plan a next step. He simply felt the cool weight beneath his palms and let that be enough. Life, he realized, wasn't a process of becoming someone else. It was a process of uncovering what had been there from the beginning, beneath expectations, mistakes, and years of trying to be useful. He covered the stone again with the tarp, not to hide it, but to let it wait. Some things didn't need to be rushed into completion. Some things were allowed to remain unfinished for a while longer. Derek turned off the lamp and closed the garage door behind him. The click of the lock echoed briefly, then disappeared into the night. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. The street was quiet the way it gets when most people have gone to bed. As he walked toward the house, his steps felt heavier in a good way, grounded. The ache in his back didn't vanish, but it didn't feel like an enemy either. It was simply part of the body that had carried him this far. Inside, he washed his hands at the sink, watching the water darken and then clear again. He didn't scrub hard. He let the oil lift gradually, leaving faint traces behind. Not everything had to be erased. He turned off the kitchen light and made his way to the bedroom, letting the house stay dim. The bed welcomed him without ceremony. He lay down and let his arms fall where they did, chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm. The image of the stone returned once more, not as a metaphor, but as a feeling. Solid, patient, shaped by time, not broken by it. Derek felt his thoughts slow, then thin. The regrets that usually circled at night didn't find much to hold on to. There was nothing to fix right now, nothing to prove, nothing to correct. Somewhere between one breath and the next, a quiet understanding settled in. Life hadn't been trying to destroy him. It had been working with what was there, removing what didn't belong, revealing what did. The sculptor doesn't create the stone. He listens to it. Derek listened now to his own body, to the quiet of the house, to the simple fact of being here. The day loosened its grip. The years softened around the edges. And in the dark, with no tools in his hands and no expectations pressing in, he allowed himself to rest as he was already shaped, already enough still becoming. The mirror didn't flatter her. It never did. Not under that bathroom light, not this late, not after a day that had already taken too much out of her. Madison leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the edge of the sink, and stared at her own face like it belonged to someone she was still trying to understand. The apartment was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes even small sounds feel loud. The faucet dripped once after she turned it off. Somewhere in the building, a distant door closed. The fan above her hummed softly, pulling warm air upward. Madison had spent most of the day looking at versions of herself. The version she posted. The version she replied with. The version she performed in short clips and captions, smiling at the right moments, sounding confident at the right times. She was good at it. She'd learned how to be on without it looking like effort. But now, alone in the bathroom, she felt like a phone with too many tabs open, bright heated, still running even after the work was over. She reached for a makeup wipe, dragged it across her cheek, and watched the cotton come away, slightly tinted. She did it again, slower this time. There was something calming about the motion. Simple. Quiet. No audience. In the mirror, her eyes looked tired. Not just sleepy tired in the way someone gets when they've been holding themselves together all day. She tried to smile just to see. It looked strange, like a gesture borrowed from another room. She let it drop. Madison wasn't having a crisis. Nothing dramatic had happened. No breakup, no scandal, no big failure. It was smaller than that, and somehow harder to name. It was the feeling that her worth lived outside of her. In reactions, in numbers, in who noticed, in whether she was wanted, admired, approved of. And when the noise stopped, she wasn't always sure what was left. She turned the faucet on again, letting water run over her hands. The sound filled the bathroom with a steady hush. She splashed her face, then patted it dry with a towel that smelled faintly like laundry soap. Her phone buzzed from the counter. A notification. She didn't pick it up. Just let it sit there, lighting up the edge of the sink and then going dark again. For a moment, she watched herself breathe. It was such an ordinary thing to notice, but it made her feel strangely human. Not a brand, not a profile, just a person with lungs and skin and a nervous system that didn't care how many likes she got that day. Madison leaned closer to the mirror, studying a small line near her mouth she hadn't noticed a year ago. It wasn't deep, it wasn't alarming, but it made her think about time and how quietly it moves through you. A memory drifted in something her grandmother used to say when Madison was little, when she'd run to her crying over a scraped knee or a bad day at school. "Smile at yourself first," her grandmother would say, gentle but certain. "Don't wait for the world to decide if you're worth being kind to." Madison had rolled her eyes back then. It sounded like something from a greeting card. But standing here now, it didn't feel cheesy. It felt practical, like advice for surviving in a world that trains you to outsource your self-worth. She set the towel down and stared at her reflection again this time, without scanning for flaws. She tried to look at herself the way she might look at a friend who'd had a long day. The way you look at someone you don't need to critique, someone you just want to understand. Her shoulders dropped slightly. It wasn't magical. It didn't fix anything. But it shifted something like moving a lamp so the harsh shadow softens. Madison placed one hand on the edge of the sink, grounding herself, and let the other rest on her own collarbone for just a second. The warmth of her skin under her palm felt real, immediate. Not a thought, not a story, just contact. She breathed in, then out. Not as a technique, just as a permission. The phone buzzed again faintly. She ignored it again. The world could wait 2 minutes. The world could wait 10. She looked at her own eyes in the mirror. Not the whole face, not the whole image, just the eyes. They were still her eyes, even after everything. Even after the long day, the constant output, the constant comparison. something in them was still steady. She didn't smile yet, not fully, but she softened her mouth just a little, like she was letting go of a habit she didn't need to keep holding. And in that small softening, she noticed a quiet truth. It wasn't that she needed more validation. It was that she needed to stop treating herself like someone who had to earn kindness. Madison turned off the bathroom light and left the door slightly open as she walked toward her bedroom. The hallway was dim, calm, the kind of dim that tells your brain it's safe to slow down. Behind her, the mirror stayed where it was reflecting an empty bathroom. It wasn't waiting to judge her. It wasn't asking for anything. It was just there. And for the first time all day, that felt like a relief. Madison lay back on her bed without turning on the lamp. The room was lit only by the soft glow from the streetlight outside filtered through the curtains. It wasn't dark enough to disappear into, but it was dark enough to stop inspecting everything. She rested one hand on her stomach, feeling it rise and fall. The other hand lay open beside her palm, up, fingers loose. Her body seemed to understand before her thoughts did that nothing more was required of her tonight. The day replayed itself in fragments. A comment she'd reread too many times. A moment where she'd wondered if she should have said something differently. A brief spike of relief when a post did well, followed by the quiet drop afterward. None of it arrived with the same sharpness it had earlier. It came through a layer of distance now, as if softened by the dim light. She thought again of the mirror. Not the image exactly, but the feeling of standing there without trying to fix anything. Without adjusting angles. Without searching for reassurance or bracing for disappointment. Just meeting herself as she was. That felt new. Madison realized how rarely she did that. How often she approached herself like a problem to solve a version, to improve a thing, to optimize. Even rest had become something she tried to do well, something to succeed at. But lying here with the room quiet and her phone face down on the nightstand, she felt no pull to perform. No need to curate. No one to convince. The thought came gently without insistence. I'm already here. She remembered how easy it had been earlier to place her hand on her own chest. How grounding it felt to feel warmth instead of judgment. It hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't changed her life. But it had changed the tone of the moment. Sometimes healing wasn't about breakthroughs. Sometimes it was about not adding another layer of pressure. Madison rolled slightly onto her side, tucking her knees in just enough to be comfortable. The sheets were cool. The pillow held the familiar shape of her head. Her breathing slowed, not because she told it to, but because there was space for it to do so. She thought about how long she'd been waiting for permission to feel okay. Waiting for the right response, the right reaction, the right signal from outside herself. As if peace were something that had to be handed to her by someone else. But nothing had stopped her from offering it to herself. The mirror hadn't demanded anything. It hadn't praised or criticized. It had simply reflected what was there. And what was there beneath the layers of effort and expectation was someone who was tired but still whole. Someone who didn't need to earn rest. Someone who didn't need to be impressive in order to be worthy of care. Madison felt her jaw unclench slightly. Her shoulders sank into the mattress. A small exhale left her longer than the ones before. There was no urgency to fall asleep, no goal to reach. If sleep came, it would come. If it didn't, this quiet was still enough. She imagined the mirror again now, empty, the bathroom light off. Nothing staring back. Nothing asking her to be different. Just a room at rest. Her thoughts began to drift, not in a scattered way, but in the slow, wandering way that comes before sleep. Images blurred together. The sharp edges of the day softened. Madison didn't think about tomorrow. She didn't plan. She didn't rehearse. She stayed with what was simple and present: breath, warmth, stillness. If she smiled now, it wasn't for the mirror. It wasn't for anyone at all. It was the kind of smile that happens when you stop resisting yourself. Small, private, almost imperceptible. She let it fade naturally. In the quiet, there was nothing to fix, nothing to prove, nothing missing. Just a person resting inside her own life. And that was enough for the night. The box was heavier than Jason expected. It scraped softly against the wood floor as he pulled it out from under the bed, inch by inch, like it had been hiding down there on purpose. A thin layer of dust coated the top. He ran his finger across it and left a clean line through the gray. Jason sat back on his heels and stared at the box for a moment, as if waiting for it to explain itself. He hadn't planned to do this tonight. He'd only meant to straighten up his room, fold a couple shirts, stack some papers, clear the chair that had become a second closet. It was late and he'd been feeling restless in that familiar way. The way you feel when you've spent too much time in your own head and not enough time in your own life. He was home for a few days between semesters, staying in his childhood bedroom. The room looked almost the same as it always had, just slightly emptier now. Fewer posters, less clutter, a different kind of silence. In the living room, the TV had been on. Earlier, some show his mom liked to watch while she folded laundry. Now the house had settled. The air conditioner clicked on and off. The hallway light cast a soft line under his door. Jason lifted the lid of the box. Inside were things he hadn't touched in years. An old baseball glove flattened and dry, a stack of birthday cards with childish handwriting, a small notebook with a cracked spiral, a cheap plastic keychain shaped like a dinosaur. He picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. The plastic was scratched, the colors faded. For a moment he felt something in his chest, small and sudden, like a door opening briefly into a room he'd forgotten existed. He set the keychain down and pulled out the notebook. It was full of drawings, superheroes, made-up creatures, messy maps of imaginary worlds. He flipped through the pages slowly, not laughing, not cringing, just watching. The kid who made these drawings hadn't been worried about being impressive. He'd been worried about whether the next page had enough space. Jason closed the notebook and leaned back against the bed frame. He'd been telling himself lately that he needed to get his life together, that he needed to move faster, aim higher, figure it out sooner. He'd been scrolling through other people's lives like they were instruction manuals, comparing timelines, comparing accomplishments, comparing confidence. And every time he tried to catch up to that imagined standard, something in him felt more tired, not more alive. Tonight, the box under the bed wasn't offering him a plan. It was offering him a memory of being okay without one. He reached in again and found a small trophy, the kind kids get just for participating. It wasn't shiny anymore. The gold paint had dulled. The plastic base was chipped. The little figure on top looked almost comical. Jason smiled despite himself. He remembered holding it with both hands, walking out of the gym like he'd won something huge. He remembered his dad clapping his mom taking a picture. The trophy hadn't been proof that he was the best. It had been proof that he'd shown up. And somehow back then, that had been enough. Jason set the trophy on the floor beside him. He looked around the room, the familiar dresser, the old desk with a few new scratches, the closet door that didn't close all the way unless you lifted it slightly. Everything looked ordinary. Nothing about it screamed treasure. And yet sitting here surrounded by these small pieces of his own history, he felt a warmth he hadn't felt in a while. Not excitement, not motivation, just a quiet sense of being held by something simple. He realized how often he'd been searching for happiness like it was somewhere else, somewhere farther, somewhere bigger, somewhere that would finally make him feel certain, like happiness was a destination and his current life was just the waiting room. But the kid who had lived in this room hadn't been waiting for his life to begin. He'd been living it. Jason picked up one more item from the box, a folded piece of paper creased many times. He opened it carefully. It was a list written in pencil titled, "Things I Like." Underneath were simple entries: pizza, drawing, rain, being home when it's dark outside, mom's hot chocolate, when dad tells jokes. Jason read the list twice. The words weren't deep. They weren't wise. They weren't trying to sound like anything. They were honest. He felt his throat tighten slightly, not with sadness exactly, but with recognition. There had been a time when joy didn't require permission, when liking something didn't have to be justified, when being alive in a small moment was enough. Jason folded the paper back up and held it in his hand for a long second. Outside his room, the house stayed quiet. The air conditioner hummed. Somewhere, the refrigerator made a soft clicking sound. He slid the box a little closer, as if wanting it nearby. Not because he needed to go backward, but because he needed to remember what he'd been running past. Jason didn't rush to put anything back. He sat there on the floor a while longer, the box open beside him, the small pile of objects spread out like a quiet map of where he'd been. None of it felt heavy now. None of it asked him to go back or become someone he no longer was. It just existed calmly, without expectation. He leaned his back against the bed and let his legs stretch out in front of him. The carpet felt familiar under his palms, worn thinner in the spots where he'd once sat to do homework or build something out of nothing. The room held his weight easily, like it remembered how. Jason thought about how often he'd been chasing a feeling of arrival. The idea that one day he'd wake up and everything would click. That he'd feel confident, complete, certain. That happiness would finally feel stable, earned, permanent. It was a tempting story, a motivating one. But sitting here now, it felt slightly off, like a direction sign that kept pointing farther away from where he already was. The box hadn't given him answers. It hadn't offered a future. It had simply reminded him that contentment had once lived in ordinary things. And maybe it still did. Jason gathered the items slowly, not in a hurry. He stacked the notebook, the cards, the small trophy, the keychain. Each thing returned to the box without ceremony. When he reached the folded list, he paused again. Being home when it's dark outside. He looked around the room, lit only by the lamp on his desk. The rest of the house was quiet, safe. Nothing demanded his attention. For the first time in days, his mind wasn't racing ahead to the next requirement. He was home. It was dark outside. And somehow, that was enough. Jason placed the paper back into the box and closed the lid. He didn't slide it all the way under the bed this time. He left it halfway out like a reminder that it was there if he ever needed it again. He stood, stretched his arms overhead, and felt his back release slightly. The familiar stiffness eased. His body, like the room, seemed relieved to stop being measured against anything else. Jason changed into an old t-shirt and lay down on the bed. The mattress felt softer than he remembered. Or maybe he was just more willing to let himself sink into it. He stared up at the ceiling for a moment, watching the faint shadows shift as a car passed outside. His thoughts drifted not in a searching way, but in a slow, wandering one. He thought about how often people missed their own lives while trying to upgrade them. How easy it was to overlook what was already holding you quietly every day. The treasure under the bed hadn't been about the past. It had been about presence. Jason rolled onto his side, tucking the blanket around himself. The house made its usual nighttime sounds. Pipes settling. A floorboard shifting somewhere. Familiar noises that didn't need interpretation. He felt his breathing slow. His jaw unclenched. His shoulders softened into the mattress. If happiness was a place, it didn't seem far away anymore. It seemed close, almost obvious, like something that had been there the whole time, waiting patiently while he looked elsewhere. Jason didn't label the feeling. He didn't try to hold on to it. He let it be what it was, quiet, gentle, complete enough. The box stayed where it was half hidden, half seen. The room stayed ordinary, and Jason rested inside it, not searching, not striving, just here. And for tonight, that was all that was needed. The hotel room was quiet in the way only temporary places are. Not the quiet of home, but the kind that doesn't know you yet. The air conditioner hummed steadily. A thin line of light slipped in through the edge of the curtains from the parking lot outside. Ava lay on the bed with her shoes already kicked off, suitcase still closed near the door, as if she hadn't decided whether to stay or leave. She was supposed to be resting. That's what layovers were for. That's what people said. But rest didn't always arrive just because the body stopped moving. Sometimes the mind kept pacing, flipping through unfinished thoughts, the way fingers flip through songs that never quite land on the right one. Ava reached for her phone, then stopped. She set it face down on the nightstand and stared up at the ceiling instead. The faint texture of the paint caught the light differently in each corner, uneven, imperfect. She followed it with her eyes until her thoughts slowed just enough to notice her own breathing again. She thought about how often her life felt like this room. Useful, functional, in motion, but somehow paused. At 29, Ava had learned how to pack light. She knew how to walk quickly through airports, how to smile without overthinking, how to adjust to time zones and expectations. She was good at moving forward. What she wasn't good at was knowing when she had arrived. Lately, a quiet unease had been following her. Not panic, not despair, just a low hum beneath everything, like a melody waiting for its next note. Is this it, or am I still warming up? She rolled onto her side and reached into her carry-on, pulling out a small notebook she kept tucked in the front pocket. It wasn't a journal exactly, more like a place for fragments, lines she liked, half-formed thoughts, things she didn't want to forget but didn't yet know how to finish. She flipped it open. Most of the pages were unfinished. Sentences that stopped mid-thought. Lists without conclusions. Ideas circled once, then left alone. Ava traced one line with her finger. It had been written months ago during another night in another city. I think I'm waiting for the part where it all makes sense. She smiled faintly and closed the notebook. Growing up, she'd believed life would have clear movements, verses, choruses, a bridge that explained everything before the ending arrived. She'd imagined she'd know when she reached the real part, the part that would confirm she was on the right track. But nothing had announced itself. Instead, life had unfolded quietly. Job offers that felt both exciting and uncertain. Relationships that ended not with explosions, but with gentle drifting apart. Choices that seemed reasonable at the time, then ambiguous later. Nothing had gone wrong, and yet something felt unfinished. Ava sat up and swung her legs over the side of the bed. The carpet was soft under her feet, patterned in a way she would never remember tomorrow. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just a little. Outside the parking lot, lights cast pale circles on the pavement. A few cars sat still, engines ticking faintly as they cooled. Somewhere in the distance, a truck passed on the highway, its sound rising and falling like a breath. She thought about how songs worked. How the first verse often didn't explain much. How melodies repeated before they resolved. How some of the most meaningful parts were transitions, places where nothing seemed to happen, but everything was quietly shifting. Maybe life was more like that than she'd expected. Maybe it wasn't meant to be judged mid-song. Ava rested her forehead lightly against the cool glass. The reflection that looked back at her was faint, layered over the dark outside. She didn't study it. She didn't search for answers there. She just stood. The feeling of being behind softened slightly. Not gone, just quieter. Like a note that didn't need to be resolved right away. She returned to the bed and lay back down, this time pulling the blanket up around her shoulders. The room held her without comment. It didn't ask where she was going next. It didn't ask if she was doing enough. It just existed, complete in its temporary way. Ava closed her eyes. For the first time that evening, She allowed the thought to settle without argument. Maybe this part isn't missing anything. Maybe it's just not finished yet. The air conditioner continued its steady rhythm. The light outside didn't change. The song of her life stayed right where it was open, unresolved, still unfolding. And that, for now, was enough to rest inside. Ava didn't fall asleep right away. She lay there listening to the quiet mechanics of the room, the steady hum of the air conditioner, the faint electrical buzz inside the walls, the distant sound of tires on asphalt far below. None of it asked for her attention. It was the kind of background noise that didn't interrupt thought, but gently slowed it. Her mind wandered again, but this time without urgency. She thought about all the moments she'd labeled as in between. The jobs that weren't quite careers. The relationships that mattered, but didn't last. The cities she passed through without planting roots. She had treated those chapters like placeholders, like they were supposed to lead somewhere else before they could count. But lying here now, she wondered if that was fair. Songs didn't rush to their endings. They lingered. They repeated phrases. They left space between notes. Ava rolled onto her back and placed one hand on her chest, feeling the gentle rise and fall beneath her palm. Her heartbeat was calm, unremarkable, steady enough to trust. She remembered being younger and assuming that clarity would arrive all at once. That one day she'd wake up knowing exactly who she was and what came next. That life would lock into place like a finished composition. Instead, it had kept improvising. And maybe that wasn't a flaw. Maybe it was the nature of being alive. She thought about the notebook again, about all the half-written lines she'd collected over the years. She'd always told herself she'd finish them later when she understood more. But maybe the unfinished lines weren't waiting to be completed. Maybe they were meant to stay open like questions that didn't need answers to be meaningful. The room felt softer now, as if the edges had blurred. Ava adjusted the pillow under her head and felt her shoulders sink deeper into the mattress. The tension she'd carried earlier, the sense that she was running out of time, had loosened its grip. She wasn't late. She wasn't early. She was simply here inside this measure of the song. Outside, a car door closed. Someone laughed briefly, then the sound faded. Life continued without announcing its purpose, without explaining itself. Ava let her breathing follow the rhythm of the room. In, out. No effort, no correction. She realized she'd been judging her life as if it were already over. As if the ending had been written and she was falling short of it. But you couldn't judge a melody before it resolved. You couldn't call a song incomplete when it was still being played. The pressure to define herself softened. She didn't need to know where everything was leading. She didn't need to label this chapter. She didn't need to turn her uncertainty into a problem to solve tonight. Some parts of life were meant to be lived before they were understood. Ava's thoughts slowed, further drifting like notes stretched longer than usual. The sense of being unfinished no longer felt like a failure. It felt like permission. Permission to continue without explanation. Permission to rest without resolution. The hotel room stayed quiet and neutral, offering no commentary. The temporary nature of it all felt strangely comforting. Nothing here was asking her to stay forever. Nothing was asking her to leave either, just to be. Ava's hand slipped from her chest to the mattress beside her. Her fingers relaxed, curling naturally. The last clear thought that passed through her mind was gentle and unforced. The song isn't done, and it doesn't need to be. Sleep came quietly after that, not as a reward, not as a conclusion, but as a pause between notes. The music continued somewhere beneath it all, unhurried, still unfolding. The laundromat was nearly empty. Two machines hummed along the back wall, their metal doors spinning slowly, rhythm steady and unhurried. A vending machine glowed in the corner, offering snacks no one seemed interested in. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting everything in the same pale wash. They sat on a hard plastic chair, laundry basket at their feet, phone resting loosely in their hand. It was late enough that no one expected conversation. People came here to wait to pass time, to let machines do work they didn't want to do themselves. No one asked questions. No one noticed much. They glanced at their phone again, not because there was anything new, but because habit pulled their thumb downward. Another scroll, another image, another life laid out in a clean frame. Someone announcing a promotion, someone smiling in a new city, someone else posting a caption about finally feeling like themselves. Each image landed quietly, but together they built a familiar weight. Everyone else is moving forward. The thought came without drama. It didn't shout. It didn't accuse. It just settled in heavy and convincing, like a fact that didn't need to be questioned. They locked the phone and slipped it into their pocket, feeling a brief sense of relief followed quickly by discomfort. Without the screen, there was nothing to distract from the feeling underneath. The dryers continued their slow rotation. A loose coin rattled inside one of the machines, tapping metal in a steady, uneven pattern. It sounded almost like a reminder, something small, out of place, but persistent. They stood up and walked to one of the washers, pressing their face close to the glass. Clothes tumbled through cloudy watercolors, blending together for a moment before separating again. Socks, shirts, a towel. Ordinary things, indistinguishable in motion. When the cycle ended, they opened the door and reached inside. Warmth met their hands, along with the faint smell of detergent. They pulled out a shirt, then another, stacking them carefully in the basket. As they worked, they noticed their hands. One thumb had a small scar near the joint, barely visible, unless you knew to look for it. A thin white line left behind from years ago. They couldn't even remember how it happened anymore. It had become part of the landscape of their skin. They turned their hands slightly, watching the lines shift as their fingers moved. No two looked exactly the same. The ridges curved and split in patterns that felt deliberate, though they knew they weren't. Fingerprints. They had learned once in school that no two were identical, not in any meaningful way. Even among billions of people, each person carried something that had never been repeated and never would be. Standing there holding damp fabric, the thought felt strange. They had spent so much time measuring themselves against others, matching timelines, comparing achievements, wondering why their path looked slower, messier, less certain. It rarely occurred to them to question the comparison itself. You don't expect one fingerprint to match another. You don't call it a failure when it doesn't. The idea hovered, not quite landing yet. They moved to a folding table and began laying clothes flat, smoothing out wrinkles with the side of their hand. The table was cool, its surface marked with scratches and faint stains from years of use. Countless people had stood here folding their own lives into neat stacks before carrying them back out into the world. They folded slowly, deliberately, a sleeve tucked in, a corner aligned. Each movement simple, repetitive, calming. Their mind drifted back to the feeling they'd had earlier, that sense of being behind. It had followed them for months now, showing up in quiet moments like this, not as panic, but as a dull, constant pressure. I should be further along. I should know what I'm doing by now. Everyone else seems to have figured it out. They paused, hands resting on a folded shirt. What if the reason it feels impossible to catch up is because there's no one to catch up to? The question didn't bring immediate comfort. It felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling. Letting go of comparison meant letting go of the map they'd been using, even if that map had never really worked for them. They picked up another piece of clothing, this time noticing the small differences. The way fabric wore thin in some places. The way seams held despite strain. Each item carried signs of its own use, its own history. No two shirts had aged the same way, even if they'd been bought together. The dryers beeped softly one by one, signaling their cycles had ended. A man in a hoodie entered the laundromat, nodded without looking up, and loaded his clothes into a machine. The space adjusted to his presence, then settled again. They stacked the last folded item and sat back down, hands resting on their knees. Their fingers left faint prints on the smooth plastic of the chair. Not visible for long. Just a slight smudge that caught the light, then disappeared. Most of the time they felt invisible, like nothing about them stood out, like they were blending into the background of their own life. But fingerprints didn't announce themselves. They were there whether anyone noticed or not. They existed without needing approval. They waited as the machines cooled the rhythm of the room, steady and predictable. The weight in their chest hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It felt less like proof of failure and more like a habit, something learned, not something true. They reached for their phone again, then stopped. Let it stay in their pocket. They looked at their hands once more. The lines were still there, unchanged, quiet, and for the first time in a while, that felt like something solid to stand on. They finished folding and slid the last stack into the laundry basket. The basket felt heavier now, not just with clothes, but with the quiet satisfaction of something completed without rush. They carried it to the empty chair and sat down again. The plastic creaked softly under their weight. The dryers were still warm, giving off a low hum that filled the room without demanding attention. They rested their hands on the basket, fingers spread slightly, and noticed the faint impressions they left behind on the smooth lid. Not clear enough to study, not permanent. Just a brief mark of contact. It made them think about how often they'd tried to leave stronger impressions elsewhere, trying to be louder, trying to be clearer, trying to be more impressive, more certain, more something. As if being unmistakable was the same thing as being valuable. They had spent years believing that if their life didn't look recognizable, if it didn't fit into familiar shapes and timelines, then it must be wrong. Too slow, too late, too different. But fingerprints were different by design. They weren't meant to line up. They weren't meant to be compared side by side and judged for consistency. Their value wasn't in how closely they matched, but in the fact that they never did. The thought settled slowly. What if my path isn't delayed, just distinct? The idea didn't come with a rush of confidence. It didn't erase doubt or suddenly make everything feel clear, but it softened something. It loosened the grip of that constant internal measuring stick. They looked around the laundromat again. Different loads, different fabrics, different people passing through at different times of night, carrying different weights. No one here was ahead or behind. They were all just here, waiting for the machines to finish, trusting the process enough to sit still. They thought about moments in their life that hadn't made sense at the time. Detours that felt unnecessary. Pauses that felt embarrassing. Choices that didn't translate well when explained to others. Those moments hadn't been wasted. They had shaped the lines, added texture, created depth in places no one else could replicate. Just like the small scar on their thumb. Just like the ridges that bent and split in patterns no one had chosen, but only they carried. They flexed their fingers slowly, feeling the joints move, the skin stretch and settle back into place. The body knew itself in ways the mind often forgot. A dryer clicked off its door, unlocking with a soft metallic sound. They stood, lifted the basket, and moved toward the exit. The door chimed gently as they pushed it open, letting in a breath of cool night air. Outside, the street was quiet. A single streetlight flickered, then steadied. The world felt open in a way it hadn't earlier. Not because anything had changed, but because they weren't trying so hard to match it. They walked to their car and set the basket in the trunk. Before closing it, they paused, hands resting on the edge, feeling the chill of the metal. They didn't need to know exactly where they were headed next. They didn't need a clean narrative or a polished explanation. They didn't need proof that their life made sense to anyone else. Their value wasn't waiting at the end of a comparison. It was already present, pressed quietly into everything they touched. Like a fingerprint, not loud, not identical, but unmistakably their own. They closed the trunk and got into the car. As they drove away, the laundromat lights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the steady flow of the road ahead. The lines on their hands stayed with them, unchanged, unrushed. Enough. They got home later than they meant to. Not because the work was impossible, but because leaving felt like letting something go. The last email, the last check, the last glance at the calendar. The small, invisible rituals that made them feel like they were still in control. When they finally stepped inside, the house was quiet. No music, no TV, just the soft sound of the HVAC running a low, steady breath in the walls. A porch light spilled in through the front window, thin and pale. They stood in the entryway for a moment without moving, still wearing their outside self. The jacket, the shoes, the posture. That posture had become automatic over the years, shoulders back, face neutral, eyes alert. The kind of body language that says, "I've got this." Even if underneath the body felt tired in places no one could see. They reached up and loosened the knot of their tie, then paused. Something about the motion made their chest tighten slightly, like removing it would mean admitting how much the day had taken out of them. So they left it on a little longer than necessary. In the hallway mirror, they caught their own reflection. The outfit still looked sharp. The hair was still in place. The expression was controlled, practiced, familiar. They had worked hard to build this version of themselves. Not in a vain way, in a survival way. A long time ago, they learned that being respected felt safer than being misunderstood. That looking capable often meant being left alone. That in certain rooms you had to arrive already armored. And over time, the armor got heavier. They stepped into the bedroom and opened the closet. The hangers were arranged neatly. Shirts grouped by color. Shoes lined up like a quiet parade. Everything in its place. Everything ready. They slipped the jacket off first. The fabric lifted away from their shoulders like a weight, leaving almost before they noticed it was there. They hung it carefully, smoothing the sleeve, adjusting the collar. It looked like nothing special on a hanger, just cloth. They unbuttoned the shirt, folded it once, then twice the way they always did. The motions were efficient, practiced. In the background, a ceiling fan turned slowly, its soft whir filling the room, like a gentle metronome. They sat on the edge of the bed and stared at their hands. Even without the jacket, they still felt the day on their skin. A meeting that didn't go well. A moment where someone challenged them. The way their voice had stayed steady while their stomach tightened. The way they'd smiled at the right times. It was strange how quickly a person could become a role. At work, they were the one who knows, the one who can handle it, the one who keeps it together. Those titles weren't official, but they lived in people's expectations. And those expectations had their own gravity. They reached for the tie again and finally pulled it loose. The fabric slid through their fingers, smooth and cool, then fell into their lap. For a second, they just held it there. It hit them then how much they depended on the costume. Not for others, for themselves. The clothes were proof. Proof that they mattered. Proof that they belonged. Proof that they weren't the younger version of themselves anymore. The one who had been overlooked, underestimated, talked over. They stood and walked back to the closet, tie still in hand, and hung it beside the jacket. Seeing it there, still quiet, made something inside them shift. If the jacket is just cloth, then what was the power they'd been carrying all day? Where did it actually live? They turned away from the closet and looked around the room. A lamp on the dresser, a water glass, a small stack of books they kept meaning to read. Ordinary objects, indifferent to job titles, indifferent to performance. The room didn't care who they were outside. The ceiling fan kept turning. The air moved gently across their skin, and for a moment they felt the simplest thing. They were still here, not as a role, not as a reputation, not as an image, just as a person in a quiet room with a tired body. They sat down again this time, letting their shoulders drop fully. The release felt almost unfamiliar, like taking off shoes you didn't realize were too tight until they're gone. A thought rose up, soft but clear. What if I'm allowed to be myself after the cloak comes off? It wasn't a question about quitting or escaping. They weren't imagining throwing everything away. They had built a life. They had responsibilities. They cared about doing well. But somewhere along the way, the doing had started to replace the being. And if they were honest, the being had been waiting patiently underneath all of it, like skin under a uniform. They stood and walked to the bathroom, turning on the faucet. Water ran cold for a second, then warmed. They washed their hands slowly, watching the way the water moved over their fingers, clear and simple. No performance, no outcome, just water doing what water does. They dried their hands and returned to the bedroom. On the hanger, the jacket stayed perfectly still. It didn't look impressive anymore. It just looked like something that could be taken off. And that felt like a kind of freedom. Later that night, the house grew even quieter. The sounds of the day had faded. No notifications, no conversations replaying themselves quite as loudly. Just the low hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak as the house settled into itself. They lay back on the bed without turning off the light right away. One arm rested across their stomach, the other along the mattress. Their breathing slowed naturally, without effort, without instruction. Their eyes drifted to the closet again. The jacket hung there exactly as they had left it. Neat, proper, still holding the shape it had worn all day, as if waiting to be called back into service. The tie beside it caught the light, slightly smooth and polished. It struck them how small it all looked from here. Earlier, those things had carried weight, authority, expectation. Now, in the quiet, they looked almost fragile. Temporary. They thought about how easily the world confuses the symbols for the substance. Titles, clothing, access, attention. Those things can open doors. They can make life easier in certain ways. They can protect you in rooms where being seen as powerful matters. But they are not the power. They are the cloak. And cloaks by nature are meant to be worn and removed. The person lying there had worn many cloaks in their life. Student, new hire, expert, leader. Each one had taught them something. Each one had required a posture, a tone, a way of holding themselves. None of them had been false, but none of them had been the whole truth either. They shifted slightly on the bed, feeling the mattress give under their weight. The body underneath the rolls felt steady, solid, real in a way that didn't depend on being recognized. There was a quiet relief in that. They remembered moments when they had been afraid to take the cloak off, afraid that without it, they would disappear, that people would stop listening, that they would lose whatever respect they had earned. But here alone in the room, nothing vanished. They were still breathing, still thinking, still present. The respect they needed most tonight wasn't coming from outside anyway. It was coming from the simple act of letting themselves rest. They reached over and turned off the lamp. The room softened instantly, edges fading into shadow. The fan continued its slow rotation, steady and indifferent. In the dark, it was easier to tell the difference between what was carried and who was carrying it. The cloak hadn't given them their voice. It hadn't given them their judgment. It hadn't given them their capacity to care, to decide, to endure. Those things had been there before the jacket ever was. They would be there tomorrow too. Tomorrow they would put the cloak on again. Step back into the world. Play the roles that help things function. There was nothing wrong with that. The cloak had its place. But it wasn't fused to them, and tonight at least they were allowed to set it down. That knowledge settled in gently, like a hand placed on the chest. They didn't need to strip their life down to nothing to be real. They didn't need to reject success to keep their soul. They didn't need to choose between being capable and being human. They could wear the cloak without mistaking it for their skin. As sleep crept closer, one last thought passed through, simple and unforced. Even without the crown, even without the room, even without the name on the door, they were still the one living this life, and that was enough. They noticed it first in their hands. Not the pain exactly, but the dryness. The fine cracks near the knuckles. The way the skin felt tight when they closed their fingers, like it had been stretched too far and left there. It was late. The bathroom light was dimmed to its softest setting, the kind meant for nighttime. The rest of the house was quiet. No voices, no movement. Just the faint sound of water moving through the pipes somewhere behind the walls. They turned on the faucet and let the water run warm, holding their hands underneath it longer than necessary. The heat felt good, grounding. When they turned the water off, the silence returned slowly, like the room was exhaling. On the counter sat a small bottle of lotion. Nothing special. No brand they were loyal to. Just something they'd picked up once because their hands hurt and it was there. They pressed the pump and watched the lotion pool in their palm. For a moment they didn't move. All day they had been using these hands for other people. Typing messages meant to reassure. Holding space for stories that weren't theirs, offering advice they hoped would help, even when they weren't sure it would. They were good at it. People said so often enough. You're so supportive. You always know what to say. I don't know what I'd do without you. Those words had once felt like praise. Lately, they felt more like a responsibility. They rubbed their hands together slowly, spreading the lotion over their skin. The scent was light, almost unnoticeable. The motion was familiar, automatic. Something they'd done countless times without thinking. But tonight, they noticed how careful they were being. How gentle. They moved the lotion into each finger, massaging the base of the thumb, the place that always ached first. The skin drank it in quickly, like it had been waiting. A thought passed through them, quiet and uncomfortable. When was the last time I treated myself this way? They had spent years learning how to respond to other people's pain, how to stay calm when emotions ran high, how to listen without interrupting, how to say the right thing without making it about themselves. Somewhere along the way, they had started doing the same thing to their own hurt, listening just enough to acknowledge it, then setting it aside, then moving on. They told themselves they were being strong, being practical, being generous. But standing there now, hands slick with lotion, they could feel the cost of that habit. The mirror reflected them back tired eyes, a face that still knew how to look composed, even when the inside felt thin. They met their own gaze briefly, then looked away, focusing instead on the simple task in front of them. They reached for a towel and dried their hands slowly. The cracks didn't sting as much anymore. The skin felt softer, more flexible. Not healed, but helped. They leaned back against the counter and let their shoulders drop. The release was small, but noticeable. Like setting down a bag they hadn't realized was digging into their arm. Throughout the day, they had been the one who listened, the one who checked in, the one who stayed steady when others couldn't. It felt good to be needed. It gave them a sense of purpose, of worth. But it also made it very easy to forget that need goes both ways. They picked up the lotion bottle again and turned it over in their hands. The label was smudged, the cap slightly crooked. It had been tossed into bags, dropped once or twice, used whenever someone else needed it. They realized then that they had been waiting for someone else to notice the cracks, waiting for someone else to offer care, waiting for someone else to say, "Hey, you don't have to hold everything alone." But tonight, no one was here to do that. And strangely, that didn't feel as lonely as it used to. They placed the bottle back on the counter and rested their palms flat against the cool surface. The contrast between the cold stone and their warmed skin made them pause. There was a quiet truth sitting just beneath the surface of the moment. Healing doesn't always come from being helped. Sometimes it comes from helping yourself in the exact way you've been offering to everyone else. They stayed there a little longer, breathing evenly, letting the idea settle without trying to shape it into a rule or a promise. The hands felt better now. Not perfect, but acknowledged. And for the first time that evening, that felt like enough. They turned off the bathroom light and let the room fall into shadow, leaving only the small nightlight glowing near the floor. The house felt different now, quieter, but not empty. More like it was holding space. They walked down the hallway slowly, noticing the way the floor felt cool under their feet. The sensation grounded them in their body in this moment instead of pulling them back into the day. In the bedroom, they sat on the edge of the bed and rested their hands in their lap. The skin felt softer now, more comfortable. The tightness had eased. It wasn't just the lotion. It was the attention. They thought about how often they had rushed past their own signals. The heaviness in the chest, the shallow breath, the way their jaw clenched when they said yes one too many times. Those signs had been there all along, quietly asking to be noticed. But noticing felt dangerous once. If they stopped to feel, would everything fall apart? If they admitted they were tired, would they still be useful? If they asked for help, would anyone show up? Those questions had shaped their habits more than they realized, so they became the one who didn't need much, the one who could handle it, the one who healed others. That role brought connection, appreciation, a sense of being indispensable. It also brought isolation, because the healer they learned often forgets how to receive. Lying back on the bed, they stared at the ceiling as the fan turned slowly above them. Each rotation was unhurried, consistent, unconcerned with outcome. The rhythm was calming in a way that didn't ask anything in return. They placed one hand over their chest. The gesture felt awkward at first, self-conscious, like they were pretending. But they kept it there, feeling the rise and fall beneath their palm, feeling the simple fact of being alive without needing to justify it. They had offered this kind of presence to others countless times, sitting quietly while someone cried, staying with them in uncertainty, not fixing, not rushing. What would it be like to offer that same patience inward? They didn't answer the question. They didn't need to. They just stayed. The ache in their chest softened slightly, not because it was solved, but because it was finally being held. There was a quiet relief in realizing that healing didn't have to arrive as a breakthrough. It could arrive as a habit, as a series of small private acts of care that no one else ever sees. A glass of water when the body is dry, a pause before saying yes, a hand on the chest instead of another explanation. These weren't grand solutions. They didn't make good stories. They didn't earn praise, but they worked. The person they had been waiting for all along, the one who would notice, who would respond, who would tend the wound with gentleness, had been here the whole time. Not as a rescuer, not as a hero, just as themselves. The room stayed quiet. The night deepened. Tomorrow they would likely slip back into familiar patterns. They would listen, support, care. That part of them wasn't wrong or broken. But tonight something had shifted. They no longer believed that their worth came from being the one who held everything together. They no longer believed that neglecting themselves was the price of being needed. They were allowed to be both compassionate and cared for. As sleep approached, their breathing grew slower, deeper. The hand on their chest stayed there, warm and steady. The healer didn't disappear. They just learned how to turn the care inward, one small moment at a time. There are days when you wake up feeling like everything is heavier than usual. Not because anything bad has happened. The sky looks the same. Work is still there. People around you are still talking and laughing. But inside, everything feels coated in a dull gray layer. Wherever you look, you notice what's missing, what's wrong, what's tiring. And it becomes easy to believe that this is just how life is. Lily is 47 years old. She works in human resources at a mid-sized company. Her job is to listen to other people's problems, help untangle conflicts, and bring order to complicated situations at work. She's been doing it for years, long enough to get used to staying calm, staying neutral, keeping a steady appearance on the outside. That evening, Lily gets home later than usual. The apartment is quiet. No TV playing, no calls waiting to be returned. She hangs her bag on the hook and walks straight into the bathroom. She doesn't turn on the bright overhead light, just the small lamp by the mirror, enough to see her reflection. She stands there for a moment. The face looking back at her is familiar, but tonight it looks more tired. Not exhausted, just worn in a quiet, accumulated way. The kind of tired that comes from holding everything together all day. Lily reaches up and touches the frame of her glasses. Thin plastic. Familiar in her hand, she takes them off and sets them on the sink. Without her glasses, everything softens slightly. The edges blur. Not sharp, but not uncomfortable either. She turns on the tap. Warm water flows steadily, fogging the mirror with a thin layer of steam. Lily bends down, washes her hands, then splashes a little water on her face. The warmth spreads, easing the tightness in her skin. She looks back at the mirror. The glass is hazy now. Her reflection softened, indistinct. And in that moment, Lily feels a small, unexpected smile form. All day long, she's been looking at everything through a similar haze. Not because things had gotten worse, but because she was tired. And when you're tired, everything naturally looks grayer. She reaches for a towel and wipes the mirror. One gentle swipe, then another. The surface clears. The light reflects more cleanly. Not brighter, just truer to what it is. Lily picks up her glasses. The lenses are marked with small smudges, fingerprints, fine dust collected over the course of a long day. She runs them under the water, then dries them carefully with a tissue. When she puts them back on, the room comes into focus again. Not more beautiful, not worse, just clearer. And in that very ordinary moment, Lily realizes something simple all day. She hasn't been seeing life directly. She's been seeing it through her own exhaustion. Sometimes we think we're seeing the truth. Everything is hard. Everyone is difficult. No matter what I do, it's never enough. But sometimes those images are just being tinted by stress and fatigue. Not because we're pessimistic, but because we haven't rested yet. Lily turns off the tap. The bathroom grows quieter. A few drops fall, then stop. She leans lightly against the sink and exhales. Not deeply, not on purpose. Just letting the breath leave her body a little more easily. A familiar thought shows up. Tomorrow will probably be the same. Lily doesn't push it away. She looks at it the way she looked at the watermarks on the mirror. It's there, but it doesn't represent the whole picture. She leaves the bathroom and steps into the living room. The warm yellow light fills the space. The room looks the same as it always does. But something inside her feels slightly different. Not because the problems are gone, just because the haze is thinned. If you're listening to this and everything from today feels darker than usual, that's okay. You may not be seeing things wrong. You might just be looking through lenses that have gathered a bit of dust. And tonight, you don't need to fix your life. You only need to gently clean the way you're seeing it. After leaving the bathroom, Lily doesn't turn on any more lights. She keeps the apartment softly lit, as if she doesn't want things to be too sharp or clear right now. She walks slowly through the living room, sets her phone down on the table, and places it face down. Not to avoid anyone, just because there's no need to look at it anymore. She sits on the sofa. The backrest is soft and familiar. As she leans into it, her body seems to remember that it doesn't need to stay upright. Her shoulders release, her neck loosens, her exhale stretches a little longer than it did when she was standing. Lily looks around the room. Familiar objects, the table lamp, the bookshelf, the small plant in the corner. Nothing has changed. And yet tonight they don't feel as heavy as they did when she first came home. Not because they're more beautiful, just because she's looking at them with eyes that are less tired. There's something easy to forget after long days like this. When we're exhausted, we see everything through that exhaustion. Casual words start to sound harsh. Small tasks feel like burdens. And it becomes easy to believe that this is the truth. But sometimes the truth is simply an image viewed through dusty lenses. Lily stands and walks over to the window. She pulls the curtain aside. Outside, the city lights are on, not loud, not dazzling, just scattered squares of light in the dark. She stands there for a moment, not thinking about the people in those rooms, just watching light and shadow exist together, like an inhale and an exhale. She realizes she doesn't need to understand anything else tonight. She doesn't need to analyze whether she handled the day well or not. She doesn't need to replay conversations in her head. She only needs to let what she sees come in, and then go without holding on to it. When Lily turns toward the bedroom, she doesn't carry any clear thoughts with her. Just a feeling that's slightly lighter than before. She sits on the edge of the bed and removes her glasses again, placing them on the table. Not because she can't see, but because she doesn't need to see anymore right now. Without the glasses, the room softens. Edges blur. The light diffuses, and in that blur, Lily feels at ease. Not everything needs to be clear all the time, especially before sleep. She lies down, the blanket settles over her. Her body finds a familiar position on its own. No special routine, no reminder to relax. Just someone who has reached the end of the day and is allowed to rest. A thought drifts through tomorrow will probably still have a lot to do. Lily doesn't follow it. She doesn't argue with it. She lets it pass like the distant headlights of a car moving down the street. If you're listening to this and recognize how often you see life through a layer of tiredness, that's okay. You don't need to force yourself to see everything more positively. With enough rest, that tint will fade on its own. Tonight doesn't ask you to understand everything. It doesn't ask you to be clear-headed. It only asks you to stop looking at life through eyes that are worn out. If you fall asleep at some point while listening to this, that's completely natural. If you're still awake, you're still resting in a safe, quiet space. Everything can be looked at again in the morning. For now, you're allowed to let things stay a little blurry. Listen a little longer, or let sleep arrive whenever it wants to. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, You're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.